Hey Optimancers, Tree and Monk here. Ever since reviewing Tasha's, I've been dying to make a Fey Wanderer Ranger build because, as I mentioned in my video review of that subclass, which I'll link in the video description and above right here, I think this is the best design subclass I've seen, certainly in Tasha's and maybe in 5th edition overall. Every ability they get is useful and interesting, and each additional feature we get is better than the last one. None of them are broken, but every single one is useful. Now, in that video, I pointed out that I found the Fey Wanderer was kind of reminiscent of Peter Pan, but our character today is no Peter Pan. Ranger of the Wilds, our character was unfortunate enough to tangle with a Yethhound. Barely escaping, our dark hero was left with a bite and a scar, and dark energy travels across it. This has left a foreboding presence that sends fear through the hearts of their enemies whenever they see them nock an arrow. One might say their enemies Quiver. Now, as the name implies, this build focuses on imposing the frightened condition on enemies. Of course, charm is also an option with the Fey Wanderer Ranger. To be clear, this is primarily a defensive tactic. This isn't a build that can take a ton of damage, though we'll have okay hit points, and being at range certainly helps. But being at range with enemies unable to close and disadvantage on their ranged attacks against us and our allies helps a lot more. However, if we really want to protect ourselves, applying the charm condition would actually be better, because then they couldn't attack us at all, but they could still attack our allies without any disadvantage. So we're going to focus on the frightened condition here, but if we do come across an enemy that is immune to frightened, but not immune to charm, we're not without our options. Now, as we get into higher levels, charm immunity and friend immunity become more common. And we don't have a way around that. But we're always going to be able to deliver enough damage to contribute. So even when we can't use our special frightening abilities, this will still be a useful character. Before we discuss the build, I'd like to thank a few of the patrons that support this channel. If you'd be interested in supporting this content, please consider visiting my Patreon. Links in the video description. Patrons of this channel receive rewards like early, non-monetized access to these videos, and an exclusive Discord community, and my top-level patrons play some D&D with me each month. Today I'd like to thank Adversity, Airhead, Rob, Anna, Aurelio Christian, Awesome Face, Ben Potts, Benjamin, Black, and Bloody Nine. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. So the build here, I've actually kind of referenced in a previous video when I talked about the Undead Warlock, because we're going to be using a dip into the Undead Warlock. Now, if we're making our character on D&D Beyond, we don't need any of the optional sources clicked on. Everything we need is available. What we will want are the optional class features, because with Ranger, the optional class features are straight out better than going with the Player's Handbook versions. And then we will also want to customize our origin, because we're going to want to move around our ability score bonuses a little bit. So the race I've gone for is Half-Elf. I just went for the regular Half-Elf, though you can certainly do a variant if you want. I just wanted the extra skill proficiencies, because one thing that's going to happen with the Fey Wanderer Ranger is we're going to be good at all our charisma-based skills, as well as all our wisdom and dexterity-based skills. So there's just lots of skills that we could be really good at. So I just want to increase that. So the base half-elf is going to give us 2 additional skill proficiencies. It's going to give us 7 overall, right at first level, which is pretty good. Deception and Intimidation are the ones I grabbed, so a couple charisma-based skills. And we've got our ability score increases set up for Constitution, Dexterity, and Wisdom. And in this case, I've set up Wisdom as the +2, though we could do Dexterity as +2 and it works out the same. Our first level will be in Ranger. Now this does a few things for us. First, we're going to get Deft Explorer. This is going to give us Expertise. And I generally recommend Perception for Expertise. It's going to be one of those skills that you probably use more than any other, though I'd say there's an argument here for Stealth. I think I will go with Perception. Hit points for a Ranger are D10, so that's reasonably strong hit points. Then we're going to get Favored Foe. A lot of people don't like Favored Foe. I think it's fine. I definitely like it at first level because we have nothing to compare it to. Often the accusation is Hunter's Mark might do more damage, but Favored Foe does way more damage than Hunter's Mark at first level because we don't have Hunter's Mark. So what it does is basically a number of times per day equal to a proficiency bonus. So starting at 2, we can do extra damage to an enemy, and it is once per turn, and it's going to start at a D4. It will eventually become a D6 at 6th level and a D8 at 14th level. Now, at those levels, Favored Foe is usually not what I'll be concentrating on, but concentration can go down. We can run out of spells. Eventually, we may still want to use Favored Foe. But at first level, we're absolutely using it. Then we're going to start out with our 3 Ranger proficiencies: Survival, Stealth, and Perception. These are kind of the classic Ranger proficiencies at first level. Survival is things like living in the wilds, but it's also tracking, which is very iconic for Rangers. Stealth, of course, if we're scouting, and Perception prevents you from being surprised. That's really important. It's also often used for just detecting other kinds of dangers. The ability scores we're going to start out with. Dexterity, we're going to put a 15. It's going to give us a 16 total. Constitution, we're going to put a 13. That's going to give a 14 total. Wisdom 14 will give us a 16 total, and Charisma 13, because we will be dipping Warlock. And that's not going to be a surprise to a lot of people, because in the previous video I actually kind of discussed this build. Now that leaves us 1 point for either Strength or Intelligence. Put it in either one you like. I'm going to go ahead and put it in Strength here. Then we're going to have a background. It's going to give us 2 more skill proficiencies. In this case I'm grabbing Athletics and Acrobatics. And that finishes our first level character. Now we're going to start with 2 short swords, though if we can switch them out for a rapier at some point, that's the way to go. We're going to start with scale mail armor. This is going to give us disadvantage on stealth checks. Ideally at some point we'll get something like a breastplate, though it's a lot cheaper to get studded leather, which you can grab at some point. It will mean a reduction in your armor class, but just by 1, and then you wouldn't have that disadvantage on stealth. But at level 1, if you're choosing between leather and scale mail, I think you got to go with the scale mail, because we're talking about a difference of 2 to your armor class. We can't give that up just for no disadvantage on stealth. Starting hit points is 12, nothing wrong with that. We've got a melee and a ranged attack. They're both +5, D8 +3, and then we can add a D4 through Favored Foe. So we're going to continue with Ranger for actually quite a bit here. So let's look at what happens at level 3. At 2nd level, we will grab a fighting style, and with this character we're going to focus on Archery. So we're going to grab the Archery combat style. At 3rd level, we're going to get Primal Awareness. This one is quite good. It gives us a bunch of spells that we can cast for free. Now at 3rd level, we'll be able to cast Speak with Animals for free. We can only do it once. After that, we would have to spend spell slots. But this is a really nice feature for a Ranger. We can see at 5th level, we're going to pick up Beast Sense, 9th level Speak with Plants, 13th level Locate Creature, 17th level Communion with Nature. All of these circumstantial spells, all super flavorful for the Ranger. So we're going to pick up the Fey Wanderer Ranger, and this gives us 3 different things. First, we're going to get Dreadful Strikes. You can augment your weapon strikes with mind-scarring magic drawn from the gloomy hollows of the Feywild. When you hit a creature with a weapon, you can deal an additional D4 psychic damage to the target that you can only do once per turn, becomes a D6 when we reach 11th level in the class. This does stack with Favored Foe because this is not using our concentration. It's not a lot of damage, but it's extra damage that we're applying every round for free. We're talking about an additional 2 to 3 damage per round, generally, from Dreadful Strikes. Then we're going to get Fey Wanderer Magic. And one thing we're going to find with the Fey Wanderer Ranger is it leans a little more into spell casting than the other Ranger subclasses do. And we'll see that more as we get into the higher level subclass abilities, because a lot of them relate specifically to casting spells for free with enhanced effect. But our basic additional spells we're going to get, at 3rd level, we get Charm Person. I find this to be a spell I don't use very often, personally. Then we get to 5th level, Misty Step. That is a fantastic spell and a great spell to have for a Ranger not normally on the Ranger spell list. This is a bonus action casting spell. It's just important to remember this character is actually going to have a lot of things they're going to be needing their bonus action for. And when I was making this character, I had to decide whether I was going to go with Crossbow Expert to use the hand crossbow for the bonus action attack. Generally, that is more damage at low levels. I mean, if we want the most damage with this character at the lowest levels, we'd be better off going very inhuman, grabbing Crossbow Expert right at level 1. The thing here is that as we move up in levels with that build, we're going to find that not having the additional +2 on ability scores means lower saving throws for some of our features, and it also means that there are a lot of our features that are going to conflict with that bonus action attack. And I actually find that the longbow seems to be a little more elegant here. We're getting the higher base damage, not very much more damage, but we're saving that feat. We get the additional +2 on our ability scores, and that bonus action is freed up. And Misty Step is one of those options. And one of the features when we get to higher level actually allows us to use Misty Step more often, more effectively, and for free. So we're going to eventually be doing a fair amount of Misty Stepping. At 9th level we get Dispel Magic. I love Dispel Magic on this build. Dispel Magic is a good spell. It often gets overshadowed by Counterspell, but there's a lot of ways Dispel Magic's actually better than Counterspell. It really depends. Don't get me wrong, I still think Counterspell is a better spell than Dispel Magic, but they fill a different niche, both good spells. At 13th level, we're going to get Dimension Door, of course, one of the best 4th level spells in the game. Though I will say that we have an enhanced effect for Misty Step that is going to make Dimension Door a little less dominating in terms of power level, though it still has advantages over the enhanced Misty Step. And then at 17th level, we're going to get Mislead, though we're not going to take this character to that level. And the third thing we're going to get is Otherworldly Glamour. This actually is 2 benefits written into one. We're going to get a bonus skill, so we're going to grab Persuasion, and whenever we make a Charisma check, we gain a bonus to the check equal to our Wisdom modifier. Primarily, this is going to be for skill use. If we were to gain something like, Counterspell through a Charisma-based class or something like that, we would be able to add our Wisdom. But that rabbit hole, I went down it. It's not worth it. So we have the Charm Person spell. We have the Speak with Animal spell. But we are going to get 3 additional spells learned. The spells I'm going to recommend at 3rd level are Goodberry and Hunter's Mark. Now we have Favored Foe available for 2 combats a day, but good chance we're going to have more than 2 combats a day. Hunter's Mark gives us another option, and it's a long duration, so it can often last for multiple combats. It's a bonus action to set up, but we have left our bonus action available, and it adds a d6 damage, so it's actually going to add more damage than Favored Foe. Also, Favored Foe is a single target, and assuming we have multiple targets in combat, one target goes down, Hunter's Mark, we can just switch to the next target and then the next target. It's going to, at this level, deliver a fair bit more damage than Favored Foe. And Goodberry, which is probably the best 1st level healing spell in the game. 10 good berries, 10 hit points, can be given out to one person for 10 hit points, or 10 different people for 1 hit point each. They last for 24 hours, so you have extra spell slots at the end of the day, you can cast them, still have them the next day. And we're going to get Absorb Elements, and this is just a reaction spell that halves energy damage that we would have taken. This is actually not a bad thing to have, especially if you are a scout, because we're going to be dealing with things like potential traps and such, and often those end up doing things like fire damage, and Absorb Elements can have that damage for us. And I find it is a spell that I don't use a lot at low levels, but I'm going to be using it more and more as we get into higher levels. We're going to go with Ranger to level 7 before we multi-class out. We're going to get the ability score improvement at 4th level, and I think you have to go with Sharpshooter here. This is going to make a significant difference on our offensive capability. I think if you're going with an archery build, you basically need to have Sharpshooter as soon as you can get it. Then we're going to get extra attack at level 5 to give us our extra longbow attack when we take the attack action. And then we're going to get Beguiling Twist, and this character is largely built around this feature. First off, we're going to have advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened. That one's no big deal. We were already resistant against charm, and frightened is actually pretty helpful, but we're going to soon have a way to get immunity to frightened a lot of the time. But the big part of this feature is whenever you or a creature you can see within 120 feet of you succeeds on a saving throw against being charmed or frightened. So this actually only works if a creature succeeds on the saving throw. And this could be an ally or an enemy. Then we can use our reaction, and the only reaction thing we even have is absorb elements. And being a ranged character, we're not making many attacks of opportunity, probably none. So our reaction is almost always going to be available to us. We can use that to force a different creature we can see within 120 feet of us to make a wisdom saving throw against our spell DC. If the save fails, the target is charmed or frightened by you, and we're generally going to choose frightened unless we expect that they are frightened immune and not charmed immune, for 1 minute. The target can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a successful save. This is the Cause Fear spell. This is a first level spell. It uses your concentration, and what it does is with a range of 60 feet, we can have one creature make a wisdom saving throw or be frightened of you for 1 minute, getting a saving throw at the end of each of its turns. We are talking about getting this using our reaction, no concentration, and no spell slot, an indefinite number of times. The only limit on this is a creature has to make a saving throw and succeed against a charm or frightened effect. The issue is, how do we get that to happen a lot? So also at level 7, we're going to be adding some spells, second level spells in this case. So what I'm going to recommend at level 7 is we're going to remove Hunter's Mark, just because we're going to be concentrating on other things in combat. And we're going to replace that with Summon Beast. Summon Beast is one of my favorite second level spells for a ranger. 1 hour concentration spell, going to give us a bestial spirit. We can choose air and have a flyby attack, or we can choose land and get pack tactics for advantage as long as we have somebody else in melee with the same target. The damage is not bad. It attacks each round for d8 plus 4 plus the spell's level, which in this case we'll be casting at second level, so d8 plus 6 piercing damage. And with 30 hit points, it doesn't go down right away either. Enemies can absolutely drop it, but they have to concentrate on it. And if they concentrate on it, then they're not concentrating on you, and that's a win. That's a second level spell slot to save yourself 30 points of damage. If we had a healing spell that healed 30 points of damage, we'd call it amazing. Well, this one might prevent 30 points of damage, and it's doing damage, and it's controlling the battlefield. Summons are wonderful. So this is kind of my go-to spell for second level ranger spells now. I definitely think it is more effective than concentrating on something like a Hunter's Mark. But if we are out of combat, I may want to concentrate on Pass Without Trace. This is another really good second level ranger spell that has become a go-to. It's always been a go-to second level ranger spell for me. Plus 10 dexterity bonus to stealth for you and everyone within 30 feet of you that you choose, which is basically your entire party. Every character, no matter how crappy they are at stealth, is going to be good at stealth when they have a Pass Without Trace on them. And then Tasha's made second level a little bit harder for rangers because aid is on there as well. And we want to have aid, so we're going to grab that as well. Choose 3 creatures within 30 feet of you, 1 action casting, and their hit point maximum goes up by 5, but also their current hit points go up by 5. So you could have 3 allies that are down, and 1 action, you bring them all back up. This spell scales particularly well, but we don't have really high level spell slots with a half caster, so it's not something I'm likely to upcast. It's going to be like, ally went down, I need to get him back up, aid. And with a duration of 8 hours, that's 5 extra hit points for 8 hours, no concentration. And at 8th level, everything comes together. We're now going to dip Warlock. And specifically, we're going to grab the Undead Patron. This is from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. And this particular subclass, when I read it and I thought about how to make the most of its abilities, we thought about things like Conquest Paladin for sure. But the Fey Wandering Ranger, although we have a multiple ability score dependency, is so good with this. And let's go over that first. So our first level feature here is Form of Dread. This is a great ability regardless, but on a Fey Wandering Ranger, it's redonkulous. It's a bonus action to set up. Once again, we need our bonus action available. And again, we don't have crossbow expert, so this is working in harmony with what we have. We can do this a number of times equal to our proficiency bonus per long rest. So right now, 3 times a day, we will absolutely use this as much as we can. This is really good. We do this as a bonus action. We make our regular attacks. Immediately, we're going to gain temporary hit points equal to a D10 plus our Warlock level. So 6 or 7 temporary hit points, nothing wrong with that. Once on each of our turns, when we hit a creature with an attack roll, we can force it to make a Wisdom saving throw. This will use our Charisma difficulty class, which is a 13, that's a +1, which means right now we're looking at a difficulty class of 12. Now you might reasonably point out that DC of 12 isn't very high, but that's okay. That's actually not bad at all if they make their save, because this is how it works. So on round 1 of a combat, use your bonus action immediately, raise Form of Dread. This is going to last for the entire combat. Then you're going to begin to attack with your attack action. And as soon as we hit a creature on our turn, then they are going to make that saving throw with a DC of 12, or they'll be frightened for a round. And if that happens, that's great. But if it doesn't happen, that is actually potentially even better. So in a certain way of thinking, it's actually better if they succeed on their saving throw. Because if they do, then that triggers our Beguiling Twist. So now we can select a different creature on the battlefield, one that hasn't been hit yet. So this is actually a better target for the frightened effect. And then they make a saving throw against Beguiling Twist, which has a DC of 2 higher. So it's actually a significantly more difficult saving throw. And if they fail, they're frightened, except not for a round. They're frightened for up to a minute. They get a saving throw every round, but they could be frightened for the rest of the battle. And on the next round, then we choose a different creature and shoot them, and they make their saving throw, and if they fail, then great, and if they make it, then we select somebody else. And we can potentially have several creatures on the battlefield all frightened of us from our Beguiling Twist ability. Now, normally if you're playing a Fey Wandering Ranger, you don't expect Beguiling Twist to come up all the time. You want it to come up as much as possible, and sometimes you do because, maybe a wizard has the Fear spell or the Hypnotic Pattern spell, and then targets a bunch of enemies, and some of them make their saves, so you can use your Beguiling Twist once. Here, we're going to be able to use it over and over and over again. In fact, the only time we're really not going to be able to use it is if the creature actually failed the initial save, in which case it's frightened anyway. So we're causing frightened over and over and over again. And this isn't the main focus of our character. This is in addition to shooting things with the arrow. So we're doing our archery damage and delivering the frightened condition over and over and over again. And unlike just using Form of Dread, where you get one creature and maybe it's frightened for a round, we potentially can have several creatures on the battlefield, all frightened of us for significant durations. And that's why Beguiling Twist works so well. Finally, with Form of Dread, we're immune to the frightened condition. So we had advantage, now we're immune. Though, again, this is not all the time. This is just proficiency bonus number of times per long rest, lasts for 1 minute, so it's 1 combat. So we're going to pick up some Warlock spells. Now again, a reminder, we have a Charisma of 13. This means we don't want spells that are going to rely heavily on our casting stat. Now for our cantrips, I recommend Mage Hand, and I recommend Minor Illusion. I'm not picking up Eldritch Blast because, again, it's based on our Charisma, and also we are going to be doing more damage with a longbow. We've got a longbow. We don't need Eldritch Blast. And the first level spells I'll be picking up, I'm going to pick up Armor of Agathis. Just another way to provide ourselves temporary hit points. And the other spell I'm going to grab is Hex. I couldn't afford to keep Hunter's Mark on my list, so we're going to grab Hex instead. These are comparable spells. Both bonus action to set up, both going to give you a d6 extra damage on your attacks. So if we have a case where we're not concentrating on anything, might as well throw up a Hex, and we get a couple d6 a turn. Also note that Hex doesn't provide a saving throw, and it makes a creature have disadvantage on an ability check of your choice. So if you do have something like a grappling character, or maybe a character who throws up web spells, we can use Hex in combination with that as well. And we're just doing the Warlock dip. We're not going back to Warlock. We're going to take Ranger all the way from here. So our combat turn looks something like this. We're going to fire 2 arrows, both with Sharpshooter, depending on the armor class of the enemy. But most of the time, we will be applying Sharpshooter. Going to hit at least once most of the time. We're going to add Dreadful Strikes on a hit. We're going to have a Summon Beast up for another d8 plus 6. That's going to have over a 50% chance to hit. And then, on a hit, we're going to have them make a saving throw to be frightened. And if they make their saving throw, then we're going to pick a different creature, and they're going to save or be frightened. Damage here, in terms of damage per round, by level 5 we're doing over 22 points, versus the baseline I use, which is 16.5 points. That's about a 34% increase. So this isn't huge damage, but the damage is solid. And then we have the Frightened over top. And we'll note that because of our Fey Wanderer Ranger, our social skills here are good. +7 on Deception, Intimidation, and Persuasion. Those are solid. Even a charisma-based character is going to be in that range. Other thing I'm going to note is the walking speed here has become 35 feet. This happened at 6th level with Ranger. Our Deft Explorer ability has scaled. Walking speed increases by 5 feet. And we have a climbing and swimming speed equivalent to 35 feet as well. Now the level I want to go to here is 15th level in Ranger or 16th level character overall. But I want to start out, let's go to level 13. So we're going to go to 12 in Ranger. So first off, we gain Tireless at level 10. This is going to allow us to give temporary hit points to ourselves. Again, d8 plus our Wisdom modifier. So in our case, Wisdom modifier is +3, d8 +3. We can do it a number of times equal to our proficiency bonus, and we gain all expended uses when we finish a long rest. So when we consider the number of ways we have to add temporary hit points, we can do Tireless a number of times equal to our proficiency bonus. We can do Dread Form a number of times equal to our proficiency bonus. And we can do Armor of Agathis as many times as we want to spend spell slots on. This character has a number of ways to replenish temporary hit points. Favorite Foe is currently a d6. We will probably not use our Favorite Foe that often with this character anymore because we're concentrating on other things. But if concentration drops and we hit a creature, there's no reason why you wouldn't add Favorite Foe to get a little bit more damage. In this case, d6, going to be a d8 very soon. Our Dreadful Strikes is now using a d6, so whenever we hit a creature, we're going to apply Dreadful Strikes unless we've already used it in the same turn. At 8th level, we pick up Land Stride. This allows us to move through difficult terrain, assuming it's non-magical, using no extra movement. We can also move through non-magical plants without being slowed by them, and we don't take damage from Thorn, Spine, similar hazard. That doesn't come up very often. In addition, we have advantage on saving throws against plants that are magically created or manipulated to impede movement. At 8th level, we're going to get ability score improvement. And I think here we want to pick up Elven Accuracy. Because Ranger is going to give us a method here of getting some pretty reliable advantage. And we want to be able to take the best advantage of that. And Elven Accuracy is the way to do it. Elven Accuracy, especially combined with something like Sharpshooter, is very effective. Because we're looking at a lower base chance to hit, so that extra die makes a bigger difference. And we'll pick up a boost to our Wisdom score. Eventually we may raise it again, but to be honest, I have no plans to do so on this particular build. At 10th level, we get Nature's Veil. This allows us to use a bonus action, once again, using a bonus action. It allows us to become invisible, along with any equipment we're wearing or carrying, until the start of our next turn. So this is not like the invisibility spell, where if we make an attack, we reveal ourselves. So the idea is you use Nature's Veil at the beginning of your turn, make your attacks with advantage, in this case with Elven Accuracy and Sharpshooter, and they're causing fear and all the rest. And this does not require concentration, so we can do this at the same time as having a summoned creature, and we can do it a number of times equal to our proficiency bonus per long rest, as with most of our abilities. At level 11, we pick up Fey Reinforcements. This is a beautiful ability. The Royal Courts of Feywild have blessed you with the assistance of Fey beings. You know, Summon Fey, which is a 3rd level summoning spell, and for us it's going to essentially replace Summon Beast unless we're casting with a 2nd level slot. It doesn't count against the number of ranger spells we know, and we can cast it without a material component. That's actually useful because the material component is a costly one. You can also cast it once without a spell slot, and you gain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. So now we have an extra 3rd level spell slot compared to any other ranger or any other half caster. And this is a big one. Whenever we start casting the spell, you can modify it so it doesn't require concentration. If you do so, the duration becomes 1 minute for that casting. So it becomes a 1 combat spell, no concentration. So we could stack it. In fact, we could have a Summon Fey up at the beginning of combat that we're concentrating on, and if we want to add a second one, we can do so. We just have to do it without concentration. So why do we want our Fey Spirit to replace Summon Beast? Because it's going to be way better. So this is the Fey Spirit that we summon with Summon Fey. First thing we'll note is that they have a short sword attack. Now, in theory, that means that if we were to hand them off a magical short sword, then they would be making magical attacks, because if short sword's listed on their stat block, then they are proficient in the short sword. And in addition, when they attack with the short sword, they do 1d6 additional force damage, and force damage is reliable damage. So we can get reliable damage with this, and we can't get reliable damage with Summon Beast. Second thing, when we choose the Fey Spirit, when we first cast it, it's either going to be Fuming, Mirthful, or Tricksy. We're going to choose Mirthful. And this is huge. This is the big one. As a bonus action, so it makes its attacks as normal, but it can also, as a bonus action, teleport 30 feet. And teleportation is useful. But when this one teleports, it can have a creature within 10 feet of it make a wisdom saving throw against our spell casting DC, and if the save succeeds, nothing happens, but if they fail, they're charmed by us for up to a minute, so we can potentially get some charm on top of the frightened. But if they make their save, then if we didn't apply Beguiling Twist that turn, because sometimes we're not going to be applying Beguiling Twist on our turn. Maybe we missed with both our attacks. Maybe we hit with an attack, but the creature failed their saving throw, and so they're already frightened and nobody made their saving throw. Well, here, if the creature makes their saving throw against being charmed, now we can apply our Beguiling Twist. So it just gives us another way to make sure we get to use Beguiling Twist almost every round. And that's why Fey Spirit is so good, because we would expect that, with a DC of 12, a lot of creatures are going to make their save against their initial frightened effect, but they certainly won't all make their save. Some creatures just don't have great wisdom saves, and they're going to fail. And that's good. We get to frighten them for a round. But if we have the Fey Spirit, we still have a way to use a Beguiling Twist. I'd imagine we'd be using our Beguiling Twist most rounds, and that's, again, just unheard of for a Fey Wandering Ranger. There's been lots of talk about how good the Dreadful Form is. Being able to frighten a creature every turn is really great. But being able to do it and then have that duration be more than a round is so much better. And then we're going to get an ability score improvement at 12th level. Now what you could do here is you could grab something like Telekinetic or Fey Touched and increase your wisdom, and then you'd have a wisdom score of 18 and a half feet on top of that. The reason I'm not going to do that here is because we are proficient in dexterity saving throws. We are not proficient in constitution saving throws, which include concentration saving throws, though we do have backups if our concentration drops, and wisdom saving throws, which are important saving throws. And so I think just to be safe, we kind of should shore up those defenses a bit with the lucky feat. Now, we could take Resilient, but we can't take Resilient in both Wisdom and Constitution. And we could take Warcaster, but it would only give us advantage on saving throws for concentration. Lucky will give us that extra die for the saving throws we need it for. This is going to give us some 3rd level spells, and the spells I'm going to recommend, number 1, let's pick up Conjure Animals. Conjure Animals can be one of the most effective summoning spells in the game. Generally, if we're picking up 8 animals, I would expect them to do somewhere around 30 to 40 points of damage around if we're not facing resistance. We will often be facing resistance. In those cases, I'd say between 15 to 20 points of damage around. That's still 15 to 20 points of damage around. The other thing is we can have this up at the same time as our Summon Fey now, because our Summon Fey we can do without concentration. Now, sometimes Conjure Animals isn't the right move. Having 8 creatures appear on the battlefield is not always practical. But when we have that open situation where either 8 creatures will be helpful in hindering enemy movement, or we just have the room for them, then it's the right play. Second one I'm going to recommend is Plant Growth. Plant Growth doesn't use concentration, and it's a 1-action cast, covers a massive area, and we can set up this ultra difficult terrain. In fact, any square we want basically has 1/4 movement speed through it. Any creature that is in this area that's large size, we can kind of gap it so that medium-sized creatures can move around freely and large-sized creatures are stuck. And it basically almost stops you in your tracks. Now, where plant growth can be set up can also be somewhat circumstantial, and it's also a little ambiguous. The DM is going to have to decide how much area you can fill with plant growth based on what's around. And I can't answer that for you. It's going to be up to your DM, but I do think this is a good investment regardless. Our DPR, we would expect, I said, about 35 points of damage, with the resistance about half that. Let's go ahead and assume resistance. Then we're getting 2 attacks. They do 17.5 points of damage on average. Then we got Dreadful Strikes for either of those if they hit for an additional d6. We can have a Summon Fey on top. It can do about 6 points of damage. Let's say 4, just because resistance. Let's assume you can't do the short sword. We're still, 38 DPR, 41% above the baseline. And that's without even using Nature's Veil. And we'll finish this character off as a 16th level character by going to Ranger 15. At level 14, we gain Vanish. This allows us to use the hide action as a bonus action. Once again, bonus action. What this means is if our bonus action is available, we can get advantage on our next attack. This is going to also benefit from Elven Accuracy. We do this with a rogue usually by level 2. With a ranger we have to wait till level 14, but it's still worthwhile. This would be like your backup. Nature's Veil is your primary because it would affect both attacks. Vanish is just going to affect your first attack. And then at 15th level, we get a fantastic ability, Misty Wanderer. We can cast Misty Step without expending a spell slot. How many times? Number of times equal to our Wisdom modifier. 3 times. And we gain them back each time we get a long rest. So now we have 1 additional 3rd level spell and 3 additional 2nd level spells, and they're all good spells. Plus all the circumstantial spells we got through Primal Awareness. In addition, whenever you cast Misty Step, you can bring along 1 willing creature you can see within 5 feet of you. And then the creature teleports to an unoccupied space of your choice within 5 feet of your destination. So what they've done is they've taken Misty Step and made it very comparable to Thunder Step. Thunder Step uses an action instead of the bonus action, but it has a longer range and it does damage to the creatures you left behind. But in terms of how I use these spells, they're going to be incredibly similar. Character's in trouble. I want to get him out of trouble. I move up, I get him out. The thing here is that because it's our bonus action, we can still attack with the attack action on our turn, frighten enemies, all that stuff. And because we're using Frightened, what we might find is that with our action, we frighten an enemy, but we've got an ally next to them. So we move up, Misty Step them out, ally's not next to them anymore, enemy can't get any closer, enemy wastes their turn. So in terms of spellcasting, don't get me wrong. This is nowhere near a primary caster, like a caster who would be casting 8th level spells at this point. But in terms of half casters, this character is a very strong caster. Probably stronger a caster than your average artificer. We're going to get 2 additional spells, and we're going to get 4th level spell slot. Freedom of movement is a good spell. It's not always needed, but when it is needed, it's very good. And I recommend Guardian of Nature. And what this can do is we can take the Great Tree form. This would allow us to make all our attacks with advantage, and we have Elven Accuracy on top of that. It also makes it difficult for enemies to get to us because all the ground around us for 15 feet is treated as difficult terrain, and it gives us advantage on a Constitution saving throw. So this gives us what Warcaster would have, except it's all Constitution saving throws. And another way to gain some temporary hit points. And this is a bonus action to set up. So once again, bonus action. What we would expect in just kind of standard DPR from this character right now is about 50 points of damage around. There's so many variables though. That is hard to calculate for every combat. But 50 points of damage is my best estimate. That includes using Summon Fey, using Dreadful Strikes, using Sharpshooter, and using our various ways to gain advantage. But I will say that this character can maintain above baseline even if we're not summoning at all. And even if we're not frightening anything at all. But we should be creating frightened a lot. So by level 8, our character comes together to do the frightening effects, right? So before that, just a ranger, nothing wrong with that, decent ranger. But once we get to level 8, now we can do the frightening through the Form of Dread, and if that fails, then we can do frightened through Beguiling Twist. Once we get Summon Fey going, though, then things get crazy, because, again, remember, we're delivering archery damage every round, just like a straight ranger would be doing. But in addition to that, what we're doing is, when we hit on our turn, we're going to have somebody make their save against being frightened from our Form of Dread. If they fail, they are frightened. If they succeed, then we're going to choose a different creature and make them frightened. Now, let's say that they fail on their save, so they're frightened. Now our Mirthful Summon Fey is going to charm a creature. If they fail, they're charmed. And if they succeed, then we still get to use our Beguiling Twist. So we should be able to get our Beguiling Twist going most rounds. And this is going to cause frightened effects that you don't automatically get rid of after a turn. So we can potentially have multiple creatures on the battlefield that are all frightened of us and maintain this. And this really doesn't even use a resource. I mean, technically Form of Dread is a resource, but it is lasting for 10 rounds at a time, several times a day. And what isn't a resource is Beguiling Twist. We can do this an indefinite amount of times. Uses our reaction, so we can only do it once on a round, but it doesn't use a resource in that we can do it over and over and over again. And theoretically, this could all be done without concentration, because eventually we're even going to be able to do the Summon Fey without using concentration. So we could potentially do this whole thing with no concentration at all. Of course, we should be concentrating on something. We have lots of options to concentrate on. But that's why I like this build so much, is that we're delivering the archery damage, but this frightened thing, it's just on top of everything else. And Beguiling Twist is just so good when you can use it all the time. So that's Quiver. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. There is a link to the completed character in the video description if you want to check it out. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D's for everyone. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon.